son inherited a rusty car from his rich dad while his brothers got 3 houses and a lot of money. But later, he discovered a shocking truth. Tommy sat alone on the front porch, watching the sun go down. The sky turned orange and pink, but Tommy didn't care. His heart was heavy. His father had passed away just a week ago. Tommy still couldn't believe it. It felt like just yesterday they were laughing in the garage, talking about old cars and good times. Now, all of that was gone. Tommy and his father had always been close. They would spend hours working on cars together. His dad taught him everything he knew: how to change oil, fix engines, and even how to drive stick shift. They shared a bond that couldn't be broken, or at least that's what Tommy thought. The day of the will reading came. Tommy sat in a quiet room with his 2 older brothers, David and Mark. The lawyer opened a folder and began to speak. David and Mark were each given 3 houses and large amounts of money. When it came to Tommy, the lawyer paused for a moment. To Tommy, the lawyer read, "I leave my 1967 Shelby Cobra." That was it. No house, no money, just an old rusty car that hadn't run in years. Tommy felt like he had been punched in the stomach. His brothers looked at him with surprise, then smirked. "Guess Dad didn't think much of you after all," Mark said with a laugh. Tommy didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was spinning. Why would his dad do this? Why leave him so little? Later that day, Tommy drove to his dad's house. The garage was quiet. Dust covered everything. In the corner, under a faded tarp, sat the Shelby Cobra. It looked worse than he remembered. The paint was chipped, and rust ate away at the edges. The tires were flat, and the windshield was cracked. But still, Tommy walked over to it. He pulled the tarp off and opened the door. The leather seat was torn, and the inside smelled like oil and dust. He sat down, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. Memories came flooding back. Riding in the passenger seat, the wind in his hair, his dad's voice laughing over the sound of the engine. Then he saw it. The glove box. Something inside caught his eye. He reached over and opened it. Inside was an old envelope, yellow with age. His name was written on the front in his dad's handwriting. It was an old envelope. Inside, he found a letter from his father. Tommy opened the letter and read it slowly. What he found shocked him. His father wrote that the car was worth more than it looked. He had hidden $60,000 in the trunk. But more important than the money, his father asked him to fix the car and take it to a private auction in London. It was his final wish. Tommy didn't know what to think, but he decided to do what his dad asked. Even though his brothers laughed at him, he didn't let their words bother him. He used the money to start restoring the car. Tommy had never restored a car before. He had worked with tools, but only for small jobs. He had changed tires, fixed lights, and cleaned engines. But this was different. This was his father's car. It was old, rusty, and the paint was chipped and dull. The seats were torn. The engine didn't even start. But his father loved this car, and Tommy wanted to honor his wish. He started by cleaning the garage. Dust covered everything. Old tools were thrown into boxes. He cleared space around the car. Then he bought a notebook. In it, he wrote down a plan. He listed everything that needed to be fixed. The list was long. He felt nervous, but he reminded himself of his father's words. This was not just about the car. It was about doing something meaningful. Tommy searched for people who knew how to fix classic cars. He found a man named Rick, who had worked with rare cars for over 30 years. Rick agreed to help. Tommy also found a painter who had painted many show cars. Her name was Maria. She loved cars and said she would do her best work. Tommy was careful with the money. He made sure every dollar was used the right way. The first step was removing the rust. The car had been sitting for many years. Moisture had eaten away at the metal. Rust covered the fenders, the doors, and even the frame. Rick and his team used special tools to scrape it off. They worked slowly to protect the shape of the car. It took weeks, but finally, the rust was gone. Tommy watched every step. He wanted to learn. Next came the engine. The engine was in bad shape. Parts were missing. Oil had leaked into places it shouldn't have. But Rick was calm. He said the car could still run again. They ordered parts from different countries. Some parts were hard to find. They waited for weeks. When the parts arrived, the team put the engine back together. They worked with care. Then came the big moment. Rick turned the key. The engine coughed, then roared to life. Tommy smiled for the first time in days. While Rick worked on the engine, Maria started on the body. She removed the old paint. Then she smoothed the surface. She chose a deep blue color, the same color Tommy's father had once talked about. She sprayed the paint slowly, layer by layer. She added a shiny coat on top. When it was done, the car looked alive again. The sunlight bounced off the paint. It sparkled. Tommy also replaced the seats. He chose black leather. He cleaned the dashboard and fixed the broken knobs. He put in a new steering wheel. Everything had to look like new. He didn't cut corners. He wanted the car to be perfect. He worked during the day and sometimes at night. He gave up vacations, parties, and rest. His friends didn't understand, but Tommy didn't care. He had a goal. During these 2 years, Tommy didn't talk much with his brothers. They had laughed when he said he would fix the car. They said it was a waste of time. They said the money should be used for something else. But Tommy stayed quiet. He didn't argue. He just worked. The car became his world. It gave him something to wake up for. It gave him purpose. Some nights, Tommy sat in the garage and looked at the car. He thought of his dad. He remembered how his dad used to polish the car on Sundays. He remembered how his dad used to talk about racing. He missed his father's voice, his laugh, and his advice. Fixing the car made him feel close to him again. It helped the pain go away, little by little. As the car neared completion, Tommy started to feel proud. People in the neighborhood noticed the change. Some even came by to look at the car. They said it was beautiful. They asked him if he would sell it. Tommy just smiled. He remembered the auction. That was the plan. That was what his father wanted. The last step was testing the car. Rick and Tommy took it to a quiet road. Rick drove first. Then Tommy sat behind the wheel. He pressed the gas. The car moved fast and smooth. The engine growled like a wild cat. It felt strong. It felt new. Tommy laughed as the wind hit his face. The car was alive again. He took pictures of the car. He sent them to the auction team in London. They replied quickly. They said the car looked amazing. They were happy to have it at the event. Tommy bought a ticket. He booked a place to stay. Everything was ready. He cleaned the car one last time. He packed his bags. He stood in the garage and looked at the car. 2 years ago, it had been a pile of metal. Now it was a work of art. Tommy felt something in his chest. He had done it. He had honored his father's wish. He had proved his brothers wrong. He had also found himself. Tommy's journey to London was long, but he didn't feel tired. He had worked hard for 2 years. Every hour he spent fixing the car was now leading to this moment. His father had asked him to take the Shelby Cobra to a private auction in London. And now, he was finally here. He drove the car onto the ferry and kept a close eye on it the entire time. It was more than just a car. It was the last link he had to his father. As he drove through the streets of London, people turned to look. The car stood out. Its deep blue paint shined in the sunlight. The chrome wheels sparkled. The engine made a low, powerful sound. People pointed, smiled, and took pictures. Tommy felt nervous, but also proud. He knew his father would have been happy to see this moment. When he reached the auction house, he was directed to a private entrance. Only rare and valuable cars were shown at this event. The Shelby Cobra had earned its place. A team came to help him park it. They asked questions about the restoration. Tommy told them how long it had taken. He told them how he had found the right experts and the best tools. They listened closely. One man nodded and said, "This car is going to make history today." Inside the auction hall, everything looked fancy. The floors were polished. The walls were covered with photos of famous cars and past events. Rich buyers from around the world had come. They wore suits and expensive watches. Some came with their own car experts. Tommy found a seat near the front. He could see the stage clearly. Soon, it was time. A large curtain lifted, and the Shelby Cobra was driven onto the stage. The lights above made it shine even more. The engine was started, and the sound filled the room. People turned their heads. Some leaned forward. Others whispered to their friends. The auctioneer smiled and picked up his microphone. "We have a very special car today," he said, "fully restored. One of a kind, a true beauty. We'll start the bidding at $1 million. Tommy felt his heart jump. He had never expected the first bid to be that high. He looked around the room. A man in the back raised his card. $1 million, the auctioneer confirmed. Then another hand went up. 1.2. Another joined in. 1.5. The numbers kept climbing. Tommy could hardly believe it. 2 million, 2.5, then 3. It was going higher and higher. Some people dropped out, but others stayed in. They raised their cards again and again. The auctioneer spoke quickly, his voice full of excitement. 3.5, 4, 4.2. Who'll go to 4.5? A man in a gray suit raised his hand. 4.5, the auctioneer shouted. Tommy was frozen. He couldn't move. The number felt unreal. Then a woman sitting near the front calmly lifted her card. 5 million, the auctioneer called out. The room went silent for a second. Do I hear more? He asked. No one moved. Going once, going twice, sold for $5 million. The room burst into applause. Tommy sat there stunned. He had done it. The car had sold for more than he had ever dreamed. His hands shook slightly. The auction team came to him and handed him the papers. They told him where to collect the payment. One man clapped him on the back and said, "Your father would be proud." Later that evening, Tommy sat in a quiet hotel room. The city lights blinked outside the window. He looked at the check, $5 million. He thought about everything that had happened, the work, the pain, the memories. He also thought about his brothers. They had laughed when he said he would fix the car. They had taken their share of the will and spent it fast. None of them had believed in what the car meant. But now, Tommy had more than money. He had something greater. After returning home, Tommy thought about what to do next. He didn't rush. He didn't go out and buy expensive things. Instead, he drove past a quiet street where he hadn't been in years. At the end of that street was his childhood home. It was the place where he had grown up, where his father had taught him how to use tools, where his mother used to bake cookies, where he and his brothers had played in the backyard. But now, the house was old. The grass was tall. The paint had faded. A for sale sign stood in front. Tommy got out of the car and walked up to the gate. He looked through the window. The living room still had the same shape. The tree in the front yard was still there, only taller. He knew what he had to do. A few days later, Tommy bought the house. He didn't throw a big party. He didn't tell anyone at first. He walked into the house alone. The air smelled a little dusty, but it felt warm. He walked through each room slowly. He touched the walls. He stood in the kitchen where his mother had cooked dinner. He walked up the stairs and stopped in the room that had once been his. The windows still had the same view. Tommy sat on the floor and closed his eyes. He remembered the sounds of laughter, the smell of his father's cologne, the way the light used to come in during the afternoons. All the years he thought he had lost were still here. They had just been waiting for him to return. He smiled. Restoring the car taught Tommy a lot. It wasn't just about tools or parts. It was a personal journey. Every day in the garage gave him time to think, reflect, and grow. He began the work feeling unsure. But the more he worked, the more he changed. The process slowly built something inside him. It taught him lessons that stayed with him far beyond the car itself. It showed him how to be strong, work hard, and believe in himself. The work was not easy. Some days were frustrating. Some tasks took longer than expected. But Tommy didn't quit. He kept going. That persistence helped him become stronger, not just with his hands, but in his heart. As progress showed, he started to believe in his own abilities. He realized that even when something feels impossible, steady work can move it forward. It helped him move on and find peace. The sadness of losing his father had stayed with him, but spending time with the car gave him a quiet space to heal. The slow, careful work helped ease his thoughts. Fixing something on the outside helped him fix something inside. The garage became a place of peace. It gave him comfort when words or people couldn't. The car wasn't just a vehicle, it was special. It carried memories of his father. It was once something his father had cared for, and now it had been left in Tommy's hands. The more he worked on it, the more he felt connected, not just to the car, but to the man who had owned it. It became more than metal. It stood for something much deeper. It was a symbol of his father's love and trust. His father could have left him anything, but he chose this. He trusted Tommy to finish what he started. That trust mattered. It gave Tommy purpose. It pushed him to do his best, not just for the car, but to honor that belief. Tommy realized that real wealth is not just money. Yes, the car had value, but it was never about the price. The real value came from what the journey gave him. He had gained patience, skill, and strength. These things couldn't be bought. They had to be earned. And Tommy earned them through effort and time. It's the lessons we learn and the strength we build. The journey changed him. It taught him more than he ever expected. He came out wiser and more sure of himself. In the end, he didn't just fix a car, he rebuilt his life. He had honored his father's last wish and proved that he could create something beautiful, even from something broken.